One paper sewing pattern that originally cost only a few dollars sold in April of 2025 for $1,118. It was not made of silk. It did not contain gold thread. It was simply an old envelope holding fragile sheets of tissue paper for a 1950s evening gown. Collectors are not paying for paper. They are paying for a lost design, a famous name, a rare size, and the chance to recreate a garment that may no longer exist anywhere else. The problem is that valuable patterns often sit beside dozens worth only $1 or $2. They get folded into grocery bags, marked with 25-cent yard sale stickers, or thrown away because someone assumes a cut pattern is useless. So before you donate a box from your mother's sewing room, check the envelope, the name beneath the logo, and every tissue piece inside. We are counting down 10 types of old sewing patterns that can bring surprising money. The details that separate a collector's piece from common craft paper, and the mistakes that can destroy the value before you ever list it. Stay with me for number 1. It looks like an ordinary Vogue pattern, but one documented example sold for more than many working sewing machines. Number 10. Original Gunny Sax patterns. If you sewed a prom dress, bridesmaid dress, or prairie-style outfit in the 1970s or 80s, this name may be hiding in your pattern box. Gunny Sax designs by Jessica McClintock are easy to recognize once you know the look. Search for high necklines, lace inserts, fitted waists, full skirts, ruffles, ribbon trim, and romantic illustrations that seem borrowed from another century. The name may appear in small print beneath the Simplicity logo, which is why hurried sellers sometimes miss it completely. But there is an important catch. Simplicity has released modern reproductions of several Gunny Sax designs. A new reissue is useful for sewing, but it is not the same collectible as an original printing. Condition changes the result. Factory-folded tissue, an uncut pattern, and a clean envelope usually attract more interest. A cut example can still sell if it is complete and the design is scarce. Do not trust the size number. A vintage size 14 may be much smaller than a modern 14. Buyers care about the printed bust measurement because they may genuinely plan to make the dress. Number 9. Discontinued movie and television costume patterns. These can look too recent to matter. That is exactly why they disappear. During the 1980s and 90s, the major pattern companies released licensed or movie-inspired costumes for characters, historical dramas, fantasy series, and blockbuster gowns. Many were printed for a limited period and vanished when the license or trend ended. The envelope artwork is important, but the real value sits inside. Costume patterns often contain many small pieces for sleeves, collars, overskirts, capes, and decorative sections. One missing piece can make a complicated garment impossible to reproduce. Open the envelope carefully and compare the tissue with the numbered list on the instruction sheet. Do not assume a thick envelope is complete. Previous owners sometimes stored scraps, traced pieces, or parts from a different pattern inside. And watch for current reproductions, digital copies, and unofficial scans. Search the exact company and pattern number, then filter for completed sales. A seller asking $200 has not proved that anyone will pay it. Number 8. Vintage men's Aloha and Western wear patterns. Old men's patterns survived in smaller numbers than many women's patterns, and today's buyers include costumers, musicians, vintage clothing fans, and people who want a historically accurate garment that modern pattern companies no longer offer. Look for 1940s and 50s sport shirts with wide collars, loop closures, unusual pocket shapes, or back panels designed for border print fabric. Western patterns may show yokes, piping, snap fronts, contrasting panels, fringe, or embroidery transfers. The garment on the envelope matters more than age alone. A plain 1970s office shirt may remain common, while an earlier ranch shirt with dramatic construction can attract several competing buyers. Larger chest sizes can also bring stronger interest, because wearable vintage sizing is difficult to find. Read the actual chest measurement rather than relying on small, medium, or large. Check for transfers too. Some Western patterns included decorative motifs that were used once and discarded. An unused transfer sheet can be the rarest part of the package. Do not separate it from the tissue. Search the exact garment type with the pattern number, because listing it simply as an old men's shirt can hide the feature buyers wanted all along. Number 7. Hollywood patterns with movie stars on the envelope. These patterns turned a trip to the sewing counter into a visit to the movies. Hollywood patterns began in 1932 and sold inexpensive versions of clothing associated with screen stars. Many envelopes placed an actress's portrait beside the illustrated dress. Production ended in the 1940s, leaving a short and highly recognizable collecting period. Look for names and faces from classic Hollywood. Collectors may want the pattern for the garment, the actress, the envelope artwork, or all three. An incomplete pattern is not always worthless. A beautiful envelope featuring a sought-after star can still have display value, although tears, water stains, and writing across the portrait reduce interest. Now, check the tissue. Many early patterns were unprinted. Instead of words and cutting lines, they used perforated holes and notches to identify the pieces. Blank tissue does not mean someone slipped packing paper into the envelope. Match each perforated letter or number to the instruction diagram. Work on a large, clean table, because a tiny facing or cuff can remain trapped in a fold. Reproductions of popular Hollywood designs exist, so the envelope, tissue, printing method, and aging should agree. A genuine original combines fashion history with film memorabilia, and that crossover can create more demand than the dress alone. Number 6. Pre-war evening gown patterns from the 1920s and 30s. Early evening patterns captured silhouettes that are difficult to reproduce without the original geometry. Collectors and costumers look for 1920s beaded dresses, dramatic capes, handkerchief hems, 1930s bias-cut gowns, low backs, unusual sleeves, and Art Deco seam lines. Survival is the key. Sewing patterns were sold as tools, not heirlooms. They were cut, pinned, altered, and sometimes discarded when the dress was finished. Complete examples from these decades are much harder to find than later mass-market patterns. Do not reject an unprinted pattern. McCall introduced printed tissue around the early 1920s, but other companies continued using perforations. Those little circles and triangles can help confirm how the pattern was meant to be assembled. Dating requires more than the number on the front, because companies reused pattern numbers. Study the envelope size, illustration, typography, price, instruction style, and any catalog reference you can locate. A patent date may describe the printing system rather than the year your pattern was sold. Never tape brittle tissue before a specialist sees it. Household tape yellows, pulls on the paper, and can turn a clean tear into permanent damage. Place loose pieces in an archival sleeve and keep the original envelope with them. Number 5. Spadia American Designer Patterns. At the midpoint, the biggest lesson is that the logo at the top is not always the name that creates the value. Spadia sold patterns by mail and worked with respected American fashion designers during the 1950s and 60s. Names connected with the line include Ceil Chapman, Joe Copeland, Susie Perrette, and other designers whose finished dresses can be expensive and difficult to find. The envelopes can look restrained compared with bright simplicity or McCall's artwork, which is one reason they are overlooked. Read every name on the front and inspect the instructions for the designer credit. Collectors prize Spadia because the pattern can preserve the construction of a real designer garment. A Ceil Chapman evening dress, for example, is more than a generic fitted gown. The draping, gathers, and internal structure are part of the designer's signature. Completeness is especially important when the construction is unusual. A missing drape or bodice section may be impossible to reconstruct from the envelope illustration. Some Spadilla patterns were ordered through newspapers or catalogs, so they may arrive in mailing envelopes rather than the packaging you expect. Keep any order form, catalog page, postmark, or original correspondence. That material helps identify the issue and preserves its history. Number 4. Vogue, couturier, and special design patterns. Vogue produced couturier patterns as early as the 1930s. The earliest examples did not always carry a famous designer's name, yet their elaborate construction and limited survival make them collectible. Special design patterns also offered more sophisticated styling than everyday lines. Look for fitted suits, sculpted bodices, complex draping, evening dresses, and envelopes that clearly say couturier design or special design. Documented sales show the range. One 1930s Vogue special design dress pattern sold for about $70, while a 1940s couturier dress with a gathered bust sold for $294. Check whether the original woven label is present. Certain premium Vogue patterns allowed the buyer to obtain a cloth label for the finished garment. Many labels were sewn into dresses or lost, so one still resting inside the envelope can add desirability. The fastest inspection is simple. Find the exact line, read the pattern number, record the bust measurement, confirm every piece, and note whether the tissue remains in its factory folds. Those details tell buyers far more than the phrase, vintage Vogue. Number 3. Rare vintage bridal patterns. Wedding patterns survive in family sewing rooms for an emotional reason. Someone kept the pattern after the dress was made, sometimes with lace samples, receipts, a photograph, or a handwritten wedding date tucked inside. Collectors and working dressmakers search for specific bridal silhouettes, especially 1930s bias gowns, 1950s full-skirted dresses, cathedral trains, unusual sleeves, and designer issues from Vogue. Complete, uncut examples can cross $100, and a documented 1950s Vogue Paris original wedding pattern sold for about $350. But bridal patterns have a hidden completeness problem. Long trains, veils, headpieces, detachable collars, and underskirts create extra tissue pieces. A former owner may have used only the dress and left the veil untouched, or moved the larger pieces into a separate envelope. Provenance can help when it is specific. A photograph showing the finished gown, paired with the original pattern and a written date, gives the object a human story. It does not automatically multiply the price, but it can make the group more appealing than loose tissue with no context. Do not remove lace, fabric swatches, or notes until you know why they were saved. And never sell the pattern separately from an important family photograph without first scanning the image and recording the connection. Number 2. Avant-garde Vogue designer patterns from the 1980s and 90s. Search for Vogue patterns credited to designers such as Issey Miyake, Donna Karan, Claude Montana, and Christian Lacroix. Certain issues now sell for hundreds of dollars when the design is scarce, complete, and in demand. Issey Miyake patterns are especially recognizable. The envelope may show oversized shapes, geometric folds, unusual seams, dramatic coats, wrapped skirts, or garments that make little sense until you study the technical drawing. That complexity is part of the appeal. Buyers are not merely collecting a famous name. They want access to construction ideas that are hard to duplicate from a photograph of the finished clothing. Look for the designer credit near the Vogue logo and read the fine print. The individualist and designer original lines deserve particular attention, but value depends on the exact number rather than the line alone. An ordinary blouse by a familiar designer may be modest, while a sculptural coat or rare ensemble can be much stronger. A carefully used pattern may still sell, because many buyers intend to trace and sew it. Do not assume a 1990s copyright makes it too new. The secondary market follows design demand, not an antiques rule. A pattern can become valuable because the garment remains influential, the original issue is out of print, and no simple modern substitute exists. Number 1. Early Vogue Paris Original Patterns. This is the line that can turn a quiet sewing room discovery into a four-figure piece of fashion history. Vogue launched Paris Original Patterns in 1949. Early issues translated designs from major couture houses, including Lanvin, Schiaparelli, Balmain, Jacques Fath, Robert Piguet, and others, into patterns a highly skilled home dressmaker could use. Past sales show why collectors pay attention. Documented examples by Robert Piguet, Nina Ricci, and Jacques Heim sold for roughly $145 to $193, while another Paris original reached $580. Then, in April of 2025, Vogue Paris Original Pattern number 1073, a 1950s Lanvin evening gown, sold through an online auction for $1,118. The design combined an early Paris original, a celebrated house, a dramatic evening gown, and exceptional scarcity. That is a rare result, not a price guide for every pattern with an Eiffel Tower or a French name. Later Paris originals, common suits, incomplete tissue, and less desired designs may sell for a fraction of that amount. Reproductions and digital copies also exist. Check for the original cloth label, but remember that labels were sometimes distributed separately at pattern counters. Its absence does not prove the pattern is wrong, and its presence does not excuse missing tissue. Research the complete identity: company, line, designer, number, garment, date, size, condition, and contents. One word left out of a listing can hide the very detail collectors are searching for. Before you close that old pattern box, remember what actually created value across this list. Age helped, but it was never enough. The patterns that attracted serious money combined rarity with a garment people still want, a designer or cultural connection, usable sizing, complete tissue, and an envelope that clearly identifies what survived. Start by sorting designer patterns from ordinary ones. Place Hollywood portraits, bridal gowns, unusual menswear, and pre-war evening designs in separate groups. Photograph both sides before opening anything. Never use household tape, glue, an iron, or marker on old tissue. Keep newspaper clippings, mailing envelopes, woven labels, transfers, handwritten notes, and photographs with the pattern they came from. When checking value, search the exact pattern number and designer, then look for completed sales. Active listings tell you what sellers hope to receive. Completed transactions show what buyers actually paid. And be realistic. A box of 50 patterns may contain 48 common examples worth only a few dollars, and one overlooked designer issue that pays for the estate sale trip. The valuable one may not be the oldest envelope or the prettiest dress. It may be the angular 1980s coat your family considered ugly, the men's ranch shirt pushed to the bottom, or the Vogue envelope nobody opened because the tissue looked blank. So before those patterns become craft paper or landfill, read every name in the small print. Because an old sewing pattern once cost less than a yard of fabric, today the right one can be worth more than the machine that was meant to sew it.